Good morning. We are live. Savio, are we live and ready to go online? So we're ready to go. Good morning, one and all. We have here, we will begin our roundtable number 4 on school food environment in Latin America, advances in public policies. So we are on the second day of this seminar, which has brought so many lessons, reflections, and discussions, fascinating ones. I'm Marcela from the Department of Nutrition and Collective Nutrition and researcher in the research group on school meals. And I have the huge pleasure to chair this incredible group, which is part of the organizing committee of the group. I want to thank our speakers for having accepted our invitation to share with us today. Together in this discussion, we will have the opportunity to hear on the school food environment and learn about the panorama in Latin America, the scenario, in addition to the Chilean, Brazilian experiences with incredible researchers. Take advantage of this to the importance of women in science and the theme of food environments who conduct research and contributions, outstanding ones, and, outstanding research that women that have done to impact different countries. We can see this clearly in this event, in addition to which the men in the organizing committee have perfectly supported feminism. So we thank them. With regard to the theme of our roundtable, school food environments, I believe that initially it behooves us to highlight several points. The advances in school food environments in Brazil, with a large number of studies, the need that we have to make more progress in the specific metrics for school food environments, as well as in the conceptual models, considering the different universe of public and private schools. The need for reflecting on food environments, competitive foods like snacks from home and commercialized foods outside the school canteens. The problem is no longer just the vendors, but digital invasion environment, and the food environment, digital food environment merits attention because it's a growing reality which brings new challenges and difficulties in monitoring digital food sales or control. In addition, in this organizational environment of the scenario in the post-pandemic period, we have children returning to schools, many of them after having had access to food and adequate food, thus serious problems of food insecurity. And we also have the small informal workers linked to school meals who are deeply affected by the pandemic and without glimpsing possibilities for adequacy to the new or adjustment to the new reality, the post-pandemic reality, or the demands for foods which contain the parents and researchers and teachers. We need to protect this space through public policies that are efficient to make schools a healthy environment with access to adequate and healthy foods, guaranteeing food security and prevent diseases. So to begin our debate, our roundtable, to begin the talks, I want to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Fernanda Kroker. She's a nutritionist with a PhD in population-based nutrition, currently working as a scientific research in the Center for Research for the Prevention of Chronic Non-Communicable Diseases in Central America and Panama, INCAP, where she leads studies on food patterns, food environments, policies to prevent non-communicable diseases and multi-centered diseases with urban health in Latin America. In Central America, rather, she has expertise as a regional consultant to UNICEF and the World Food Program, and she's a member of the Latin American Society of Nutrition, the Latin American Network of Urban Health, and that of Ethical Governance and Conflict of Interest in Public Health. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. So I'll turn the floor over to you for your presentation.
Hello,
good morning, one and all.
and thank you
for
very
the
much for the
invitation.
invitation. Today, I would like to talk to you about a research in Latin America about which are the most effective interventions in the promotion of physical activity and healthy eating habits in Latin American schools. I have no disclosures, and I will talk very briefly about overweight and obesity in infancy in Latin America and the Caribbean, and I will share with you the results of a study, a systematic review of the most effective interventions in the prevention of overweight and obesity, and to find what does work in Latin America and the Caribbean. And of course, we try to analyze the gaps between what scientific evidence says, what is published in literature, and what is actually the case with policies in Latin America. So to kick off, you probably are familiarized with this study. The trend in overweight and obesity in children below 5 years of age in Latin America and the Caribbean is growing. In Central America, the Caribbean, in South America, it has been less sharp, but ultimately there is a trend of growth in these trends. When we take a look at national representative domestic figures, we see prevalence in school-age children. More than 50 million of children and teens from birth to 18 years of age are overweight or obese, and 20-25% of this represents the total population of children and adolescents. So it's essential to talk about eating habits. So which are the causes or the determinants why obesity and overweight is so prevalent in this age group? Well, evidence shows that there is a totally unregulated environment with marketing and availability of elements that make you consume unhealthy foods, which is known as obese promoting food environment, obesogenic food environment. And there is great obesity in the region, in spite of the fact that not all countries have increased their legal framework in the same way. Look at this canteen in Chile, and look at a quote unquote food stand in Guatemala in a village near urban sites. There are great amounts of fried fruits, unhealthy foods, no availability of produce or very nutritious food stuffs. So it's a totally unregulated environment. So we have to admit that there is great diversity and heterogeneity.
América Latina e Caribenha. Por que é tão importante
Important to focus on school as an environment? Well, first, because children spend most of their time at school, where eating habits and health promotion can be encouraged or disencouraged. So this is the ideal environment to implement overweight and obesity interactions. When we talk about malnutrition, one intervention at school is not effective to reduce chronic malnutrition. But when we take a look at evidence, we see that in school-age children, you can prevent overweight and obesity, and there are very effective interventions. So this is a paradigm and a myth that we have to dismantle, because many school programs are focused on the prevention of malnutrition when there is no evidence that malnutrition can be prevented in this way. But the case is that in Central America, children go to the public system of schools after 5 years of age. And after 5 years of age, we cannot prevent malnutrition. So the target of our paper was a literature systematic review to determine which are the effective intervention and actions to prevent overweight and obesity in school environments in Latin America and the Caribbean. And second, to define which Latin American Caribbean countries implement interventions that are effective for the prevention of obesity and overweight, considering that some countries have passed legislation, they have a legal framework, and some countries have programs but are not public programs. So we wanted to make this difference as well. So we searched in different databases, as you can see on screen. A lot of information available in Latin America. We defined inclusion and exclusion criteria. And we also defined those interventions that had an endpoint in health as chronic obesity or overweight prevention in school environments that would assess children and adolescents in Latin American countries or in the Caribbean between the year 2000 and 2016. And we wanted to measure effectiveness, and we needed a control group. That's why we needed randomized clinical trials or experimental trials. So basically speaking, we revised literature and we included 42 scientific articles. There are 42 studies that fulfilled the inclusion criteria. And basically, what we found were 6 important endpoints that were included in the final report, not only overweight and obesity, because there are other interventions, and 6 important endpoints. 1, a drop in the body mass index. 2, improved availability and access to healthy food, improved physical education and sports, and a study focused on metabolic syndrome components, another one on concepts of nutrition and healthy eating habits. But our study not only focuses on effective and ineffective interventions, but also we tried to go into further detail and describe out of which these interventions are effective and describe how the intervention was implemented. There is wide variety in implementation practices. For instance, if I teach nutrition in a school, there are very many ways to do this. An example is to change the school curriculum or different training sessions for parents or other training activities. So there are many subcomponents that we had to define in our systemic review. So we also focused on the fact that education and physical activities and sports to promote active recreation breaks. There are many studies that focused on food plans created by professional nutrition specialists. And in the left-hand side, you see that there are many, many examples and many different subcomponents. Of course, due to time restrictions, I cannot mention each one of them, but the most important are shown in the left-hand side of the column. So a healthy food environment, healthy water, mindfulness, and many other components. Due to time restrictions, I cannot talk about all of the endpoints, but let me focus on the interventions, the effective interventions to reduce BMI. These interventions prevent obesity and overweight. The good thing is that, yes, there are interventions, and we identified at least 8 in Latin America and the Caribbean region. So which are the characteristics of these interventions? Well, they are multi-component initiatives, not only including physical activities or training sessions, but there are many components. But there are 4 important and key components to reduce obesity and overweight. First, to share knowledge on nutrition and health, increase physical activities, provide healthy eating guidelines that is a legal framework within the school. And 4, and maybe at least for me, the most important one is to make available healthy food, change food environments. So in different colors, we have the subcomponents. These are the different ways we can implement this component. For instance, knowledge in nutrition and health. Some change the school curriculum, others included other information material, trained parents, trained staff, trained teachers, or physical education, more time devoted to physical education and sports, or family practice, active recreation breaks, physical activity campaigns, tournaments. There are many tournaments, but ultimately they were effective to prevent overweight and obesity, have healthy eating guidelines. studies show that canteen owners should have a list of what can be sold and cannot be sold and change menus. And of course, a healthy environment, that is to regulate the availability of healthy food with the intervention in the space where people, that is children, interact, make these spaces healthy. So considering all of these variables, what we did was we focused on the second part of our study, which is, okay, then we know that there are effective interventions. Which countries in Latin America actually implement these interventions, and which countries have passed legislation for this purpose? That is, which countries are aligned with best evidence available? So we searched online policies and programs in more than 40 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, trying to identify different information sources, government seminars, legislation, reports, technical documents, and we classified information in two groups. First, legal framework, act, legislation, and non-regulatory programs and other activities promoted by non-governmental initiatives, as is the case with some Caribbean islands. There are 10 Latin American countries that do have a legal framework, and these legal frameworks do have effective interventions to prevent overweight and obesity. But mind you that when we analyzed effective interventions, there were at least 3 of the 4 components. This was the criteria, that is, they made nutrition knowledge available together with physical education and a healthy food environment. That is, out of the 4 components, we had to identify 3. So these are the countries that have at least 3 of these components with proven effectiveness to prevent obesity and overweight: Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay. When we focused on countries that do have these components, at least 3 currently implemented at schools, there are 4 countries in the Caribbean that include these components but have no legal framework. That is, initiatives are implemented by non-government agencies. This is a weakness because these programs can be interrupted, changed. They do not have a long-term sustainability as if it were the case of a legal framework. So which are the conclusions? Well, first, in Latin America and the Caribbean, there is a very important gap between the legal framework and best scientific evidence available. All legal instruments available and analyzed, only 25% have a legal framework that do include effective components that do work to prevent overweight and obesity. And only 10 countries in the region: Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico, Uruguay, and Uruguay. The experience of Chile and Uruguay will follow suit, and they do have a legal framework. They're multi-component initiatives to prevent overweight and obesity, and most countries have instruments that are not included in any sort of legal framework. There are successful cases in the region. Chile, Peru, Uruguay, and Ecuador have implemented very interesting cross-cutting initiatives. But it's important to mention that there has been a shift in food environment, not only at school environments, but due to national legislation. For instance, the warning labeling. This warning labeling has ruled availability of foods, sponsorships, and created a different environment in schools. And definitely, these are the countries that in a most effective manner intervened. So the most effective interventions are the ones that combine interventions to improve knowledge in health and nutrition, increase physical activity or sports, have very clear, healthy food guidelines for canteens and suppliers and change the food environment. Availability, marketing, availability of food and beverages in schools has to be based on the based scientific information and free of conflicts of interest. Thank you very much for my friends at INCAP and of course UNICEF that financed this paper and research. And I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fernanda. We still have some time. So thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Okay, I apologize. Let me now switch into Portuguese. And now we have some more time, and this is going to raise so many questions during the discussion. So these studies are so important and truly contribute so much to this well-identified problem of obesity and overweight kids, identifying what is needed so that interventions are successful and are truly implemented is a great contribution. Thank you. In order not to be late, I would like to now invite Marcela. Marcela, the second speaker. She's Dr. Marcela Reyes. She's a doctor with a master's degree and a PhD in nutrition and food health from the University of Chile. She is from INCAP and a researcher in food, environment, and chronic disease related to food and health. And she participated in longitudinal studies related to the Chilean law 26,106 about labeling. And she is also the PI in Chile, establishing the effect of a diet in overweight kids and changes, metabolic changes between kids in preschool age and teenagers, and the consumption of non-caloric food after the implementation of the labeling and advertising law in Chile. The results of these studies will contribute towards the development of structural policies for healthier environment and non-transmittable diseases. So I'd like to thank once again Marcela Reyes for the invitation, for accepting our invitation. And now I'd like to give you the floor so you can present. Thank you so much.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you very much for hosting this very interesting event on food environments. So please, I will share my screen. What I want to share with you this morning are the policies that we have for school food environments implemented in Chile. My agenda will include school food environments with a brief background, which is the diet and nutritional situation in Chilean schools as a context and backdrop for the implementation of our policies. Then I would briefly mention which are the current policies enforced in school food environments, and the acronym in Spanish is AAE, and what is going on and which are the challenges. So let me start briefly talking about school food environments. In general, these environments are the physical, economic, social, and cultural characteristics of the environments that make you change your diet beyond your desire. So no matter how much you think about eating an apple, if there is no apple available, and considering the price, advertising, the availability, what is available where I spend most of my time, what my peers think about when I eat one product or the other, the nutrition quality of these products, what ultimately I choose, and it will maybe not be an apple, but it will be potato chips, ultra processed products. So this makes eating healthy easier or more difficult. So eating healthy food is this very heavy ball that I have to lift, and this slope is a healthy eating habit, and a more healthy behavior will decrease the slope, and I will be able to walk without that much effort. In the micro environment, which is school, children spend most of their day. And of course, children learn from teachers and peers on behavior examples. So considering everything, we know that, for instance, first we have to see how we are eating, how our kids are eating in Chile at school. This is a survey on preschoolers and teenagers. So we see that this is the distribution of calories, of saturated total sugars or sodium in preschoolers, and for adolescents, a sample that we are currently following in our institution, and 10 to 15% of calories, saturated fats, sugars, sodium are eaten during school time. And with teenagers, this is much greater. So if intake takes place at home, intake at school of critical risk factor nutrients for heart disease are eaten at school. This is more relevant for sugar and is more relevant in teenagers than preschoolers. And if we see the quality of diet at home compared to school, in the case of preschoolers, we see that diet at school is more energetic and with more sugar density compared to diet at school, with less saturated fat and sodium, with lower percentages at school. Conversely, for adolescents, everything they eat at school is not healthy compared to what they eat at home. So we need to focus on the impact of nutritional and diet policies in the school environment. How do we eat? Well, on the one hand, we need to focus on the fact that our school-age children have a very important problem with overweight and obesity. This is severe or regular obesity in pre-kindergarten children, 3-4 years of age, almost 30%. Kindergarten, above that figure, 30% at different age groups, and it only drops in teenagers, probably drops because they lose weight. There is more muscle, less body fat, and we see that if we add overweight and obesity, we have more than 50% of total population in school age that are in this percentage. And of course, this is the social and economic distribution of municipalities in the greater Santiago. And we see that in the more vulnerable areas, obesity and overweight is higher. Furthermore, obesity, total obesity and overweight has increased with a rather normal slope, but in detriment of normal weight scales. And in the year 2002, 1999, we see that the increase has been sharper. So we're really doing worse, since there is an slow but increasing slope of overweight and obesity. So which policies have been passed to improve these environments? In the end of the 90s, 97, obesity as a child problem was identified. And these agencies were created. They are school agencies that promote health for the promotion of extracurricular activities, sports, physical education, healthy breaks, some interesting options for healthy snacks.
Marcela. Então, nós já vamos tentar retomar isso. Marcela?
Volví.
I'm back. Here I am again. Thank you, Marcela, very much. Well, let's hope things work well. I don't know if I was able to talk about schools that promote health practices. Was I connected? Yes, we heard that part of the presentation. Okay, then, so I will proceed then. By the end of the 90s, these health promoting institutes were created for the promotion of school curriculum with healthy food information, active practice of sports, very active school breaks, and promotion of healthy snacks. 10 years after this first initiative, the global obesity strategy was promoted as part of the National Health Promotion Plan. This plan has a part that articulated initiatives with these health promoting establishments to focus activities in some schools that already had these institutes, the most vulnerable schools, the schools that had more obesity percentages, that is, in a pilot initiative focusing on non-compulsory components, but okay, they were promotional activities, but ultimately they were not compulsory. Of course, we tried to change availability of healthy food in canteens. We realized that there were very few minutes of physical activities, so we tried to foster physical activities. So these are healthy stalls with recommendations and guides, and forbade certain foods with promotion activities, trying to make these stalls interesting with different incentives. For instance, if you purchased an apple, you would have a free beverage, for instance. So marketing initiatives for children to purchase healthier foods. So This was the case between the 1990 and the year 2000. In 2016, the Label Act was passed in my country. So these new labels are known as the black labels with high components in calories, high component in foods, high components in fat. And these products cannot be sold in schools. They cannot be sold in canteens or be part of school food programs. They can't be sold in cafeterias, and they cannot be advertised with billboards or ads or whatever. And these two components, and this not only applies to processed or packaged foods, but for any food, no matter if it's manufactured or industrialized or not. So take a look at the consequences of this implementation. This was a very important challenge for food programs in schools because they used a lot of industrialized and canned products, and all the bids that were organized throughout the years, because of course we are a very narrow and long country. We have 3 regions in my country, so not all schools implemented the program at the same time. But with time, they all had to change their purchase practices. And in canteens, this assessment in 2019 shows the difference between which were the products with high content of the forbidden nutrients in 2014 compared to 2016. And look at the drop, not to 0 as expected, but 80–90% drop of the availability of high nutrient, high calorie, high sugar, or high saturated fat or high sodium component products. So this was a great assessment of this shift. We also studied qualitative results, interviewing moms of preschoolers and adolescents, and we asked these moms their perception of the implementation of this new labeling initiative and what their children mentioned. So look at the quotes. For instance, this is the mom of a 13-year-old teen boy. My son didn't want to have restricted foods at school because in the past, he would take money home and he would buy a hamburger. And then when they change everything, I would ask him, what did you buy at school? Nothing. It's horrible. Oh, horrible. There were vegetable sandwiches or cheese sandwiches with no ketchup or mayo, and they sold fruit. And I asked my child, what did you purchase? Nothing. So he brought the money back home. So this is a very interesting comment. This child hated this new change, and he brought his money, his allowance back home because there was nothing he wanted to purchase at the school canteen. And this is another case of a boy, a 13-year-old boy, and my son bought French fries with his alimony, but I didn't give him any more money because he was gaining weight, and I said, you can't buy any more French fries. After that, the woman that sells canteen food at my child's school started selling healthier sandwiches with avocado, with cheese. And then my child started purchasing these healthier sandwiches. And the most important thing, look at this contribution. The school is an agent of change. Moms realized that in schools, due to the change in school snacks and due to what they had been talking about with their teachers, they were the ones that wanted to change eating habits at school. They wanted to eat healthy foods at school. So they were the promotion of change at home. So for instance, look at this mom of a 5-year-old girl. Because of this new act, my daughter has taught us a lot about this black labels. He says, Mom, you can't buy that because my teacher says you can't buy anything that has these black labels. And she says she wants to have salads and eat healthy snacks. So look at the change in the family, in the social fabric due to what children learn at school. So it's not a question of forbidding or allowing, but rather there is a change in eating habits. Another consequence is that, of course, since there were many restrictions, supermarkets had to really invent new products as fruit, purees, or other healthy options. So there was a new niche of healthier products compared to the restriction of other products. Of course, there is an economic component. Of course, there are windows that are closed, but other windows that are open. So this is a preliminary study. I don't have the charts available yet, but look at the fact that the change in behavior in preschoolers and adolescents, a healthier diet has decreased. Sodium components and other initiatives, and the fraction of foods as what is the case in the moment in the region with the cafeteria and other eating programs is healthier. We see that they are trying to offset what they do outside of the school environment, but this shows that it is essential to change diet and eating habits at school, and schools have an essential role in a positive or a negative manner, depending on policies. Another thing is that a plan to fight against overweight was implemented, but the national department in government responsible for school food programs has established this program to reduce sugar by 5%, local purchase of local farmers, salad bars, intelligent wearables, and active breaks. But nevertheless, as part of this situation, as we see the case in many countries in Latin America, there are plans that are associated to a government office or term. And when the term finishes of the incumbent government, programs change. And this was the case with this plan, but some policies are currently underway. Which are the innovations of this school program? What is currently taking place with the current bidding rounds is that there has been a change. We have 4 initiatives that I want to share with you today. What is going on right now? Instead of eating these meals, like TV meals with these holes in the tray, now children eat in regular dishes. We realized that children ate less and the organoleptic component of foods was worse if food was presented like this in these TV dinners or trays. And that if you make food available in this other way in regular dishes, everything was better. And then we have a initiative in which recipes in foods or other recipes from our migrations, that is, we have immigrants from Peru, from Venezuela, and Haiti. So 3 times a month, the kitchens and schools will cook recipes from these countries in a way to really provide a healthy environment for these immigrant children. And local farming, that is, we try to establish that a certain percentage of produce purchase has to come from local farmers, promoting the livelihood of farmers in the neighborhood, and of course, trying to use seasoned produce with special days in the menus in different regions. Menus were the same for the whole of Chile, and this makes no sense because there are different regions in Chile with different climates and availability of different foods in our country. And look at this cooking lab with different chefs. Children cook and have fun with the recipes and cook, and children are invited to cook, and they learn how to cook different recipes and the origin of certain foods. So this was really a fantastic initiative to accept healthy recipes and healthier foods. So we're currently with a bidding round for school meals for the next 4 years. And what is the current situation in Chile? Well, we have created a program in Chile called Choose Healthy Lives. And we have a stamp with this heart that looks like an apple. And this stamp certifies healthy canteens, healthy snacks. And we have other initiatives in healthier environments. For instance, food, water, beverage stands available. We're talking about the possibility of deciding whether your school wants to participate in this initiative. It is not a cross-cutting policy. Rather, each school that wants to implement these challenges, you have to apply. And to wrap up, look at the way forward. Of course, the pandemic has been a very important challenge because we had to close down our schools and we had to implement these boxes for families, this delivery of food for families for 2 weeks. And what I was saying before, look at these seal stamps, like this stamp here with a heart that looks like an apple. But the pandemic presented really very different challenges. Another challenge is that after the Label Act that has really changed the school environment. But the thing is that when you leave the school environment, the Label Act is not compulsory everywhere. So if children leave the school, they can go to any place outside the school and buy unhealthy foods. Our initiative now focuses on the implementation of these compulsory national strategies in all schools to align these initiatives and focus on improving school menus. And which are the new national strategies? We know that ultimately, no matter how much time children spend at school, their homes are the most important component. They spend there a lot of time. So we really need to focus on a consistent policy with food promotion campaigns for these products that have the black label that say have sodium content, have high saturated fat content. So we have a protected environment at school, but there should be a consistency outside of school. And one of the challenges ahead is the challenge that we're focusing right now. We are currently drafting a new constitution in Chile, and the new president of the National Constitutional Convention comes from original people's community. And the challenge is to implement and include all of these topics as guaranteed rights in the Constitution with a legal framework supported by our national Constitution. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm available for the debate. Thank you.
We see the rich example of labeling. We see the mother and the child testimony and so many other measures adopted by Chile. So I have so many notes that I took down for our discussion session later on. I would just like to say that people can send questions. And then as soon as our next speaker closes, we'll be finalizing discussions. And you can then send your questions. I'd like to thank you so much, Marcela and Fernanda, who presented these excellent presentations. And then I would like to call you the third speaker, Dr. Daniela Canella. Thank you so much. She's a nutritionist with a master's and a doctor's degree in public health by the faculty of the unit of UFSC. She's a professor of the Department of Applied Nutrition and the program on nutrition, food and health in the Nutrition Institute from the University of the State of Rio de Janeiro. She's also the current coordinator of the postgraduate studies in nutrition, food and health, and she's a researcher in the Nucleus for Epidemiological Research in Nutrition and Health, NUPENS, São Paulo. Thank you, Daniela. I am going to give you the floor so you can explain the reality of the Brazilian case. I think the amount of information we have here is excellent. I'd like to give you the floor now, and then we'll open for discussion. It's a pleasure to be here and to dialogue with you. And so let's go on and tell me if it's okay. Okay, if you can see my presentation. Okay, yes, wonderful. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening to those who are in different time zones. My idea is to bring the Brazilian experience regarding the school food environment. I'd like to bring to you the context because of the characteristic of this workshop. It is a Latin American workshop and not simply Brazilian. What is the environment? What and how are these schools? These are data from the school survey of 2020 showing almost 80,000 elementary school and high schools covering almost 48 million students. Amongst them, most are public, municipal or state-owned, and 19% of Brazilian schools are private-owned. This is important so we can think about the existing policies and try to understand the context. In terms of school food environment, in Brazil, we have some privileges, or rather we had them till a while ago. One of them is to have populational surveys that also look at the food environment. So I have some data from the National Survey of 2015. Among some of the aspects, we had the school food environment. So we had information about public and private schools. These are representative data from Brazilian schools. And what we find in terms of structure and supply of food is that most public schools have their kitchens that are operational. And this is useful for the second part of my presentation, whereas this is less frequent in private schools. a bit less frequent, but that also has to do with the scenario of the supply of food in private schools. Another important issue, if we think about the supply of food, is to have these kids be able to eat in school. And the canteen is an important item. And here we have smaller frequency. We also have gardens, and less than a third of public and private schools have gardens with that planting vegetables. And in alternative points of sale around the schools, we find less frequency. We find that less frequently. If we think about canteen in private schools, since they don't have the offer of lunch as a mandate, the offer of canteens is less frequent, but 46% of public schools don't even have canteens inside the school and do not have any food being sold in the neighborhood. So when we think about school food environment, since we have this important policy, and I will mention that in a while, we have almost 100% of schools offering food. That's not 100% because there are situations in which at a certain point in time, at the time of the PENSE survey, there might have been an interruption in supply. But when we look at canteens in schools, those schools that do have them, the scenario then is a bit more dramatic. Private schools do offer fresh fruit more frequently, but according to reports and indicators related to unhealthy food, the scenario is dramatic in private schools. So sweetened drinks and cookies and candies, sugared drinks, and that is not, and fast food. More than 50% of schools assessed in the context of PENSE were commercializing these items. These are data not from PENSE, but from ERICA. These are two issues that PENSE is not assessing. The automatic machines and dispensable machines. This is not very frequent, but these self-service machines are commercializing unhealthy food, basically ultra-processed food. And once again, although the frequency is not low, it is there in some schools more frequently in private schools, as well as advertising food. It should be zero. There should be no advertising of ultra-processed food. And although it is not high, it did appear in the context of ERICA. So this is the context of food environment in private and public schools in Brazil. We have other studies relating to this, but I brought some studies that were more representative at the national level. How does the food environment appear in the context of public policies in Brazil? I'll be talking to you about the school program and what we have regarding canteens and restaurants inside schools. But I'd like to say that other policies, be them in the health sector, be them related to education, what they bring regarding to their scope. But there are two important issues. One is no longer enforced, the National Plan for Nutritional Food Security, and the other enforced since this year, strategic plans to face chronic disease. Both value the school environment practices. In the case of chronic disease, it values the importance of monitoring school environment and health of students. And also it deals with aspects that are commercialized, of what's commercialized and sold in schools as being important for the control of chronic disease and to assure nutritional and food security. So school environment is something that is across all sectors in public policies in Brazil and are part of important targets in the context not only of public health, but also intersectorial policies in Brazil. Regarding the National Plan for School Foods, this is one of the oldest policies. It started in the 50s with a decree as a campaign for school foods, and then it went through different changes, decentralization, changes in what might be offered as part of school foods. So it goes from process to a program that today has a different characteristic. It has for some years of providing real food in schools until it reached 2020 with a new resolution, number 06, which is the one I'm going to stress in my presentation in the next slides. But this is a very important program which evolved along the years. And it's worthwhile mentioning because other policies got stuck in time, and this was not the case of PNAE. So the National Program for School Foods means to meet the nutritional needs of students during the school year, so as to contribute towards their biopsychosocial development and growth, learning, school performance, and for the development of healthy food practices and nutritional practices through mainly the supply of real food. So these are the guidelines of this program: adequate and healthy food, respect to culture, traditions, and habits, nutritional education, universality, universal access. So it is a universal policy. I will be talking about this. All students have a right towards school food. It has social control. That's an important element for follow-up, but also for thinking about the evolution of the program and social control. Another guideline is support towards sustainable development. And here there's a specific legislation I'm going to stress, and right to school food, which is part of our federal constitution, by the way. If food is part of the constitution in 2010, well, school food was mentioned even before that. Users of the program. It is a universally accessible program for all students since basic education, elementary school, throughout high school and adult education, meeting the needs of all students in Brazilian schools. That's different from programs, important older programs from other countries. And this was very important so that in 2014, Brazil could get out of the map of hunger, overcoming nutritional and food insecurity back then in 2014. These are data from a recently published studies about data from the Baixada Santista region, talking about the importance of PNAE regarding food and nutritional insecurity. Here they related the frequency of school meal and food and nutritional security of students and families. What they found was that those families in a situation of mild to moderate or severe food insecurity, these people had a more frequent consumption of school meals, showing the role of school meals to support nutritional security of the assessed families, showing the importance of the program. But when we talk about nutritional security, it's not just access to food but it's access to healthy and adequate food. Data from PENSE of 2012 and also those from 2015 show the same thing. Moderate or regular consumption of school food at least 3 times or 5 times a week was associated to higher consumption of beans and raw and cooked vegetables, as well as fruits. So associated to healthier habits, the consumption of healthier food and lower consumption of fried food and processed food and packaged foods and cookies, contributing towards the consumption of healthy foods and protecting students from unhealthy foods. Regarding nutritional status, there are findings showing that PNAE is also related to adequate eutrophic conditions of students. This study compared consumption of school meal purchased at the canteen or brought from home. These were public school students. Those who were eating school meals were being protected from malnutrition and obesity both. And the second study shows that adherence to school meals, those who were eating every day in school, presented less prevalence of obesity when compared to students who were not eating in school daily. Regarding PNAE's laws, and just to prove the importance of the program, I will tell you about this legislation. A very important one is this, dated from 2009, talking about family agriculture. 30% of federal funds directed towards states and municipalities for school meals should be focused on the purchase of family agriculture food, prioritizing then purchases from those who were settled by the land reform, products produced by indigenous, traditional, or quilombola communities. This is an important landmark of our national program. And now I'm going to go into the resolution dated of May 8th, 2020. That's when it was published. And although the resolution of 2013, although PNAE was a very daring program aligned to what our food guidelines state in 2020, when this resolution was published, what happened is that PNAE finally got truly aligned with the guidelines for kids below 2 years of age, as published in 2019, and started considering also the theoretical framework presented in the nutritional profile of PAHO in 2016, and it included all changes seen in the Brazilian nutritional scenario. So I'm going to bring to you what this resolution advocates regarding purchases. Regarding menus, menus must be prepared by the technical person in charge, a nutritionist. They must be using in natura or natural food, minimally processed. They should or must consider all those elements I mentioned in the guidelines. Food habits, culture, nutritional needs, sustainability, seasonality, so as to promote adequate healthy food. Menus must meet 20 to 70% of nutritional needs regarding energy and macronutrients, thinking about the modality of education and how long they spend in school. So most Brazilian students stay half-time, part-time in school. that's why we have differences in nutritional intake. And finally, what is most interesting, thinking about recommendations that talk mainly about food. Although the macronutrients have been maintained, and in the case of daycare students, it has been maintained, the new resolution tries to base itself on food and processing of food. In line with the guide, one of the recommendations talks about the offer of fruits and vegetables in the menu. So what is the minimum amount to be offered a week, and the number of foods to be offered to, considering this is a very important group of food for the quality indicator of diet, and also thinking about the intake of some macronutrients, iron and vitamin A are some of these nutrients. But if we think about different metrics and recommendations expressed in values of micronutrients, maybe that's difficult to be attained. But even more than that, it would be hard to monitor from the point of view of social control. And social control is one of PNI's indicators. So bringing the approach of the source supply of foods is an innovation. Regarding iron, the resolution mentions that how many foods should be supplied as sources of heme iron or non-heme iron in combination with sources of vitamin C, trying to be in line with the recommendation, and the same for vitamin A. How many times a week should menus provide vitamin A foods? And variety, diversity is also important. It deals with micronutrients without mentioning necessarily how much of that. That's important for the follow-up of quality of the diet and social control. The program also restricts in the menus the supply of some categories of food, processed or ultra-processed. These are the ones that are limited, depending on the school being part-time or full-time. And the prohibition of a series of ultra-processed foods, depending, and here once again, we are in line with our nutritional guide. One of the most innovative items is thinking about the use of financial resources. How should funds be distributed in terms of groups of food? The resolution says that at least 75% of resources must be used for the purchase of natural or minimally processed food, 20 at the most for processed and ultra-processed, and 5% to ingredients that are necessary to prepare the meals. At the time of proposing these items, there were some studies that analyzed the budget of some municipalities and whether this resolution would be financially feasible, how it would relate to nutritional and energy consumption. And we found that the approach, the financial approach, matched the nutritional one. And then we found that at least 25% of the analyzed cities were already in line with the proposal, showing that it is feasible. This is also necessary, right? When we think about public policies. Now going into school canteens, well, we have data from PENSA 2012 showing how the presence of canteens in schools commercializing unhealthy food, how that is related to higher consumption of these foods, showing how important it is to regulate what is sold in food canteens. IDEC had this published a few years ago, mapping what we had in terms of legal instruments in different states and municipalities. We had a few, and there was no national guideline regarding school canteens. Just to give you an example, we have the case of Rio de Janeiro. This is where I am located physically. Since 2002, Rio has this instrument related to canteens. The state of Rio de Janeiro also has this, but once again, thinking about the alignment with the guide, and these instruments need to be updated. In this respect, since 2019, we have in the Legislative Assembly a prohibition of sweetened food and ultra-processed food in public and private schools. We have a list here of products that should not be sold.
So the progress in the discussion of this agenda has been led both by the Alliance for Healthy and Adequate Food in Rio de Janeiro and for the Desiderata Institute, and the bill is going to come up for vote. So we're waiting anxiously for the vote on this bill of law and its implementation in the school canteens in Rio. In Brazil, there's also a bill of law under review since 2007 with a ban on sodas or soft drinks and awaiting the vote. But it's been there for years on the table and the last for it to come up to a vote. And now we're still waiting for the vote to come up in the National Congress. And by way of conclusion, and my time is almost running out, highlighting this, that historically there's been important strides in the national school meal program. This is an extremely important stride in terms of the program's legislation, and this despite a completely unfavorable political scenario. Brazilians know what we've experienced in recent years, and our Latin American brothers and sisters must be monitoring the horrible situation in Brazil. But it's important that in the post-pandemic period, when the situation is somewhat better, for this new resolution to be assessed, because it was implemented in the context of the pandemic when schools were only functioning partially with very diverse scenarios and heterogeneous scenarios in school functioning. We need to assess and move forward with the legislation related to canteens. It's important for us to have national legislation for this purpose. But while this legislation, national legislation, is not that we have municipal and state legislation, I'd like to conclude by valuing the role of academia in all of this, especially in the public universities, which have been attacked and underfinanced in recent years by the government. The academia has an important role in the production of evidence, but also in dialogue with governments and civil society to understand the demands and to think of the production of evidence to support agenda by the government and civil society to make progress with and move forward with legislation and resolution with regard to the school meal program. The collaborating centers have been extremely important, this network in a sense also. And I believe that beyond the production of evidence, the academia can also support governments and civil society in analyses like those that were performed to back the resolution of 2020 to understand the scenario, analyze administrative data. It's extremely difficult, and sometimes the government isn't able, and staff members or academia can support government for us resolutions that are actually effective, that in fact are feasible in order to implement. So that was all for the time being. So thank you very much for your attention. I've gone a little bit over my time limit. That was right on the button. Perfect, Daniela. It was excellent to hear you with all of these studies and all these data demonstrating the importance and the evolution that we have in the program in Penai here in Brazil. So I think that also it's essential for us to be able to do a number of reflections now in our discussion. So it was great. So I thank you indeed for your talk, which was brilliant with these various different points for us to be able to discuss. So now we'll begin our debate. I have some questions, so I'm going to upload them with a first round of questions for you. some praise here. I'm gonna some points. Professor Larissa Mendes praised the thoughts and reflections that you have were interesting. So she says, Professor Larissa says that in Brazil, with the debate on regulation of canteens, but the debate on regulation of the surroundings beyond the school walls is in the initial phase. She'd like to know this debate, how it's moving in Guatemala and in Chile. In addition to which, Inés Regani, professor, states, Marcela, the experience in Chile is very inspiring. Thank you very much for sharing. I would like for you to comment further on activities in monitoring the implementation of the labeling law on unexpected effects of the law and you're dealing with these effects. In addition to which, Professor Inés is also asking Fernanda and Marcela if you could comment on strategies for linking the promotion of healthy food and the school curriculum, because oftentimes activities happen one-off, not on a daily basis, and with a limited approach, limited to the biological and nutritional perspective, nutrient-based approach to food. Have you seen progress in a multidimensional approach to food and more daily and routine activities linked to the different courses in the school curriculum and not just biology? So questions we can have for a first round with all of the talks, and I would like to add to that as well for Daniela, the data that you presented. We are able to internally have seen great evolution with the quality of food and the health indicators, children's health indicators. Nevertheless, we've seen that the data that you showed, school surrounding the vicinity of the school is a major problem. So how do you view that we could possibly deal with this? And even example that with the issue of evidence of healthier school surroundings. Could you share something as an example for Brazil? So let's have this first round, and after which we'll continue with other questions. So thank you very much. Fernanda, I don't know who'd like to begin.
The first part of the question was not translated. Now I am listening to the interpreter. No, there was a comment in the beginning. Give me a second, Fernanda. About Guatemala. What happened in Guatemala compared to what Chile and Brazil was doing, but I didn't get the translation because I didn't have the translation on. Let me find the question. I didn't listen to the interpretation, but I understand the rest with reference to the questions that you're making. Well, as far as monitoring, as is the case with other policies, monitoring is basically done in the implementation of policies.
It's what happened is the case in monitoring, subsequent monitoring, it's much less
not
intense.
That intense.
So
in
at
the
a first
beginning,
level, monitoring was
is
done
carried out
and are
was made
available with
available,
the
and we have
results
the
of this
results of these
monitoring
initial monitoring
in the
activities
webpage of the
at
Ministry of
the
Health.
Ministry of Health's site. And expected, it had to do with a lot of implementation in the first weeks and the first stages of the implementation. And the first moment was education and incentives for the implementation. And in the beginning, there was a certain degree of uncertainty of what was forbidden or what not. So the monitoring sort of helped us kick off the implementation. But then, both in schools as well as labeling and advertising, monitoring is less frequent, although there is some degree of monitoring. The legislation increased staff allocated for inspection purposes in the different locations. This as far as inspection. Monitoring could be made by academia or NGOs. We, as part of the academia, are currently studying the effects of the legislation, not as far as the compliance, but with studies to study diet shifts. And we have seen changes in school diets. Unexpected effects, as I was asked. Well, we are currently watching what is going on with reformulation of food. That has nothing to do with school environment, but the legislation and components. The decrease of sugar content in packaged food and the replacement of these sugars for sweeteners. And ultimately, we are questioning whether there is a decrease of ultra-processed foods or simply improving the quality of ultra-processed foods available and consequently consumed. Apparently, the second question is the one that apparently is taking case. This is what we intended? Is this the necessary evil? Are we going in the right direction or not? Actually, we were thinking about a completely different scenario. And after the implementation of the legislation in Mexico that was implemented with marketing restrictions with non-caloric sweeteners, as is the case of Argentina, with legislation passed in this sense, forbidding the use of certain sweeteners, we will have compared legislations because for the moment, it is controversial whether this is a wanted or a desired effect in the right direction, or if this is enough, or if it totally does not go towards the desired objective. And the last question is the articulation of healthy foods and curricular component. Actually, this is just in the beginning. Label Act said that curriculum should include cooking classes, nutrition, teaching classes, not only considering this from a nutritional perspective, but in other areas. So we're really thinking about the concept of healthy schools. But the thing is that implementation is very scarce for the moment, since this is not a compulsory policy. There is little inclusion of cooking classes or home economics or other classes. We still have a long way to go. Thank you, Marcela.
People help me on the question here. Brazil, we have a debate on the regulation of canteens, school canteens, but the debate on the school surroundings or the vicinity of the schools, on schools' walls is still very incipient. So Larissa, this Guatemala and Chile have some regulation surroundings. So there's some difference as well, and some on the issue of public schools and private schools. Well, for one as opposed to the other.
Regulatorio para Latinoamérica y Caribe en cuanto a regulación de ambiente alimentario alrededor de las escuelas. Entonces, esto es
This is something there is still one of the positive, we don't have any mechanism to prevent. So to talk about intake outside the schools, it's like an utopia. This is the case of Guatemala. We don't even have what we sell inside the schools. So much less, you know, outside the school. So this is different from, and it is very good that Brazil is doing it. But sometimes I guess New Zealand has some laws, South Korea, countries of higher income, but I think that Latin America and the Caribbean, we are just starting to regulate inside schools. I'm sorry, yes. In the case of Chile, as I was saying, the law, well, we were considered 100 meters, but these lost inside the Congress debate. And in fact, something that we are doing, we have some cases that we know that outside they cross, you know, and sell to the inside of the schools. So there are things happening that some mayors or they have established an additional law that you cannot have nearby the schools this kind of sale, but this is not part of a policy, and this is something that I would like to do. And I showed at our challenges because although 100 meters you do not have any, but 20 meters you have, you know, we have an offer of different kind of food, and something that are really, because part of our results, and sometimes we can be really effective, but and otherwise we have a worst intake, worse than ever. So we need coherent policies, because the obesogenic environment is so strong that to put it only as a, it won't be enough. If we can implement
Thank you very much, Marcela. Daniela, to add to the question that I'd asked you previously, there's a question for you, and I'll give it back to them for them to comment later. In your view, what are the main difficulties and challenges in the implementation of regulatory measures concerning the school food environment, especially the surroundings?
According to the environment,
It's
it is
difficult.
really hard, because if it is hard
It's
for
difficult
us
to find and implement measures for the
implement,
canteens
you know, the laws that are
in the
inside of
schools
schools,
from outside.
outside is really
It's
harder,
even more
as
complex.
you can imagine.
And they think
So
this is
I
a
guess
point
this is a really very
in
hard
convergent
aspect,
issues, because you regulate the
if we're
canteens
talking
in the
about
schools, but you don't regulate the surroundings. That's what Marcela was saying. You can
say
you're selling outside.
what is
It's
being
part of the
sold, can
school
pass
curriculum
through
and outside the walls. We
schools, and
see
we
this in some
observe that in
scenarios.
some scenarios.
We
So
might have to
probably
think
we would
in a
have
more
to,
expanded way and
better
consider
way, and start to
the urban in the organization, the
in the
cities consider
organization
zoning
and a
policies.
policy.
I'm
But
somewhat
I'm really
fearful of the
afraid
discussion
of
at this
this
time that we're
discussion in
experiencing
this
now,
moment that
an
we are
increase in
having of a higher
unemployment in Brazil,
unemployment.
impoverishment of the population, greater portion of the population in the informal work market. I think that we're there moving in the pandemic with some return to schools. I would guess that it's possible that informality will increase in the surroundings of the schools, of street vendors could have a survival strategy. Okay. What could be sold? What would be reasonable here? In Rio, it's common to have fruit. This would be reasonable in schools, in school doors, to consider convergent issues, which think inside and outside the school, but don't overlook the profile of the living conditions of population. I think that this makes the scenario more challenging, even more challenging. So it's very challenging and a lot of difficulties for us to be able to actually have this. I'm certain that the scenario that we're experiencing here in Latin America and the Caribbean is quite complex, and it tends to become even worse. It has already been aggravated by the pandemic. So returning to in-person classes in schools with a lot of debate and a lot of difficulties, we have to work to find solutions to that. And Fernanda, that question that had come in before related to the issue of the school curriculum that you'd asked me about, that Marcela already answered. I don't know if you want to add to that or some other information from Guatemala, that the strategies for linkage and the promotion of healthy food and the curriculum activities. I don't know if you could understand that in the mixture of Portuguese and Spanish.
Yes, great. Thank you very much for the question. Very interesting. In the systematic review, what we have seen is that exactly if there were changes at curricular level, but we couldn't go deep enough to see whether these changes in curricula were cross-cutting in all of the curricular content, not only in biology assignments, for instance, but this would be a very interesting research topic to see if this multidimensional research took place and which was the effect in knowledge, in the prevention of overweight and obesity. This is an interesting perspective, but let me talk about what we really found in the Guatemalan context in the systematic review. We're still taking very initial steps, thinking about the regulation of school environments, or really trying to implement effective interventions. We have an act that focuses on the amount allocated per child. We have some legislation on forbidden foods, but the environment is not regulated, not even within schools or outside of schools. And we haven't even regulated what is taught in schools. Of course, there is a certain degree of nutrition in curriculum contexts, but I could talk more about the global progress in Latin America, but not specifically in Guatemala. But the question is really very interesting because it points to the fact whether there is a cross-cutting dissemination of knowledge or whether we have specific assignments. INCAP carried out a research, a couple of years ago, we organized a random trial in different schools in Guatemala. And we found that one very effective intervention to increase produce consumption within schools was an activity called 5 minutes for a piece of fruit. And we asked all children to bring fruit from home because everybody has a tree in the backyard, or they could purchase whatever. But the idea was to spend very little money, but bring fruit from home. And at home, in the classroom, they would break for 5 minutes to eat this fruit. And while eating the fruit, the teacher would talk about the vitamin content. Some would bring an apple, some would take a banana. And this 5-minute break would be used to talk about fruit, a specific break, a protected environment to talk about this in the classroom. And we tried to implement this experience in Costa Rica. In Guatemala, it was very effective to increase the consumption of fruit and produce. But in Costa Rica, they said, the Ministry of Health said, no, you can't eat in classrooms. It's impossible. It's forbidden. So you see, each country has such different legal frameworks. We had to change the approach completely for Costa Rica and to organize other type of activities because eating within the classroom is forbidden. So yes, definitely there are strategies, and we still need to focus on these strategies, and we still need to talk about what is effective. What does clinical evidence say that does work? And we have to focus on consistency, as Marcela said.
I think that's why the studies like this review is essential, so that whenever we decide to do something, we can focus truly on something that is effective and that is going to bring about results, in spite of all the differences amongst countries. We already have so many differences amongst the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So just think about the whole world. Now, I have another question, Fernanda. I saw that you analyzed, and one of the characteristic of components was the standard of healthy food related to a reduction in the BMI. I know that it's complex, but what was related to this standard of healthy food? Was it related to groups of food or some specific nutritional characteristic of certain foods? Did you analyze that?
If I understand what you're asking me which are the characteristics made possible to reduce overweight and obesity in these studies? Well, a key component is that these studies are school studies, not individual studies. And we see demographic changes depending on the intervention implemented. We can see the effect of the intervention. And oftentimes it is very important to say, yes, exactly what was implemented, what was done. What we tried to do is to really focus on the different activities, but this was so heterogeneous that it was rather difficult to see specificities. What I can tell you is that ultimately there are many ways we can deliver an intervention. There might be changes in the canteen, but the most effective interaction was that children are in a regulated environment, and a combination of strategies, not one diet change. Of course, diet is important, but it is knowledge, what is available to purchase, changes in the environment, and physical activities. When you combine all of these components, this is effective to reduce overweight and obesity. If you only change diet, interventions are not effective. If you only increase physical education, it is not an effective intervention. There are different components in a regulated environment to really do change BMI.
Well, thank you so much. We only have 5 minutes to close our table. So one last question to Marcela and Daniela, and then I'll give you the floor so you can conclude. Marcela, when you mention Chile Viver Saudável, Chile living, healthy living, grouping very interesting strategies. Who performs the inspection, the monitoring of the sites? Who obtains this label, the stamp? And you have a series of items or characteristics and approaches to this plan. But regarding this stamp, can you talk about this?
Yes. Actually, we have a program that focuses on multi-sectorial approaches, not only for schools. And what we actually do is to regulate and administer with resources allocated by the Social Development Ministry. The most important thing in this initiative, and what is widely accepted, which is outside of the Ministry of Health, and articulates measures that are related with education and education in a more multi-sectorial approach. The plan and this stamp, the plan and the stamp is implemented and launched right before the pandemic. And actually, the idea was on a voluntary basis. The image said, register here. You had to register to participate. It was not voluntary, it was not compulsory. And the idea was to implement a more proactive initiative, trying to make schools to participate. But with the shutdown of schools due to the pandemic, the possibility to really leverage this initiative decreased. So now, with school and classes resuming the face-to-face activities, we will see what we will do to step up this initiative. So, but for the moment, it is developed by the Social Development Ministry on a voluntary basis. The challenge is to make this compulsory.
Daniela, I think there is another item, and I think it's very interesting. She says, what are the strategies for managers and service providers in the different school environments? How can these adults be knowledge multipliers in these environments? And perhaps another item for the survival strategy of informality, that would be kids bringing products to be commercialized and thus help the family income or family agricultural producers or something like that. Do you see that as being potentially feasible, or could it be implemented considering the Brazilian context? I believe it is important that we have training and awareness programs specifically for each one of these areas. How can we these are more interesting. I think we could think about this locally in accordance with the characteristics of schools. There are problems. FIAN has been doing
what healthy food is, the human right to adequate and healthy food for social actors to be able to demand and pressure and lobby to have a healthier food environment, so that a lot of different possibilities of considering the different contexts and the different actors, what are the best activities for training and awareness raising to begin to see or upgrade to think of improvements in this school food environment. So what people are doing, they're guiding, they're having lunch pails, the things that are happening, or that we don't know systematically and reflected on scientifically and discussed. So this is important because we're in a difficult scenario. It's going to take some time for us to escape this difficult scenario. And we need to know the reality to attempt to support the population to upgrade and qualify these strategies, which can be extremely important for a resumption and return to a decent democratic country, which actually takes care of the population and considering the working and living conditions of the people. Academia has an extremely important role of attempting to reflect on which research questions, which operationalize these research questions for us to understand these strategies which have been practiced and to think how we can support people to upgrade these strategies, whether in schools or in the urban context. We have an extremely important task there with civil society. Great, Daniela. Our social responsibility, is our technical and scientific responsibility is essential at the time we're experiencing here in Brazil, in our country, and the reality that we've faced here with the challenges. Okay, we've already gone behind our time limit. I don't know if anyone would like to have a summary phrase at the end to sum up and a take-home message for us to be able to thank the speakers. Like take-home messages, please. I don't know if you'd like to comment on something. Fernanda, Marcela, Daniela. A quick comment. The roundtable is very rich. It's great for us to see things that have been happening in other countries with the data that Fernanda has shared. Chile is a dream. We always get excited when we hear the news from Marcela and Camila and other research from Chile, sharing their experience. And it's very inspiring and enlightening. And Latin America has done interesting things. We need to make further progress. I think that we need to move forward with this agenda, but I think Latin America, in fact, has interesting experiences which merit being valued, that are important, where academia has, with schools and with the government, to think and produce scientific evidence to be able to support and make progress with our agenda. So I think this is a source of joy to see what has been produced in the Latin American Caribbean region. So it was essential. It was an extremely enriching roundtable, very constructive. It gives us a lot of ideas and prospects for the future on research. It's great to be able to see reality, what is done in other countries, what works, examples that are extremely interesting that you've shared with us. So I think that we have a long road ahead of us. It's not the situation that we were in several decades ago, but we still have a long road ahead. And the issue now is to map out the priorities and what we can attempt to do with so many fronts. But what is truly essential now and crucial and more effective as a priority for us to be able to focus on and to adjust to the reality in each country. So I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart, Fernanda and Kroker, for your demonstration of all the research from Guatemala and other countries as well in the scenario that we have here in Latin America and the Caribbean. Marcela as well. Reyes, it was perfect, wonderful to learn about all the wealth of work that is developed in Chile. And Daniela, you were incredible to see your data sharing all the wealth of studies that we have here in Brazil, showing the growth and the development of our school meal program and what we can make further progress on. And we've lost some rights, but we can reclaim them in the future, and we can improve this reality, knowing that the school meal program has produced such positive results to benefit so many people in Brazil. So I want to thank you on behalf of the organizing committee for your participation. It was a wonderful roundtable. I loved and I've learned so much from you. Thank you very much. And we'll continue with us in the program now in the afternoon. Okay. I want to thank you once again, and thank you very much, one and all. Thank you. It was wonderful.